Welcome back everyone once again for another SnowRunner truck review. Today we're going to take a look at the last two of the four new trucks from Season 14 Reap and Sow DLC. These two vehicles are unique in how well they fit into the new farming mechanics in Season 14. So before we start, I ask that you please help support the channel by liking the video and subscribing to the channel as well. Alright, with that over, let's get started on the review. Based on the Valmet 1502, the Ankatra breaks into the game of SnowRunner with some things to be desired, but also with some very impressive features as well. This small off-road class tractor doesn't necessarily break records as far as numbers are concerned, yet its ability is admirable even for being smaller. The Futom 7290 Romeo Alpha, however, is based on the Xerion 5000, which is a all-wheel steer, robust tractor with a 12.8-liter Mercedes-Benz engine that can potentially reach speeds of up to 31 miles per hour or 50 kilometers per hour. In SnowRunner, both of these trucks do enter the DLC that I must say I was a little bit skeptical about here on Season 14 prior to driving them on the PTS. With Saber's new approach to agriculture in Season 14's Reap and Sow DLC, they have provided some vehicles essentially to make the jobs much more pleasurable. In this review, I will expedite both of the upsides and downsides for both vehicles, while taking a little bit more time to talk about some important points. So with that being said, let's talk about the Ankatra 1160, starting with the downsides. Simply put here at downside number one, it's not the best at 150,000 torque, but it's not bad also considering the vehicle's actual weight, which gives it a decent power to weight, but it's not outstanding as we mentioned earlier. Not only does the collision model of the Ankatra show its clearance issues, it can also suffer from its front weight add-on if applied. It tends to catch terrain while off-roading. While I do believe this can be in instances that are few and far between, I do think this can be an issue. However, the front weight will help its turning when farming, especially with the Harvester add-on. This essentially is up to the driver whether or not they would like to use it. Okay, so to make things very clear before I start here, double tires are super advantageous that we will talk about later, just due to their overall width and their weight. But I have seen this truck run aground in some thick places on Season 14 and also on some fields. For this reason, I would use this truck for cultivating and perhaps planting, but leave the harvesting to a vehicle that won't struggle on a beat up field. Lastly, I must mention that the Harvester will kind of diminish its amazing sharp steering, which we will talk about later, due to the add-on sitting on the truck's rear frame alone. This might be a time where the front weights could help here. Keeping things short here on downside number 4, there's really not much to say other than the Ankatra simply has a very small fuel tank here. Despite having decent fuel consumption, as we will learn a little bit later here on the review, drivers need to be cognizant of their support truck locations in support of this tractor. Logging can be pretty tough, especially when it's in the dark. If you play hard mode, you understand what I'm talking about. Having the smallest logging crane in the game doesn't really help the Ankatra's cause, but I believe with correct technique, it won't be a huge issue self-loading itself with the new Futom trailers. I believe that not every vehicle that is awarded with an add-on means they are actually good at the job the add-on is intended for. The Ankatra is actually decent at logging, to be honest, but it's not something I would reach for, especially if I'm trying to deliver a mass amount of logs like we do in Season 14. Here's my question: why take one load via Futom trailer with the Ankatra when I could take a 6x6 or bigger that can potentially move more sets of logs at a faster speed? Okay, so despite all these downsides we just listed, the Ankatra actually has some good qualities here that I think folks will really like. So let's take a look at the pros now. In short here at upside number 1, it gets switchable all-wheel drive and a switchable diff lock, which it very much so needs, especially in farming muddy fields and delivering heavy loads. Double tires do wonderful things for stability, which we'll talk about here later on the upsides, but also it does wonderful things for mud performance and pulling power due to scaling, which I did talk about in prior videos on pulling power and the effective weights of wheels and helping potential pulling power. Please go check that video out separately. Also, I just want to mention, usually on 6x6s, having double axles or dual rear tires giving you that scaling is pending that you have access to doubles. Here, the Ankatra has doubles effectively on all axles, making its weights 400 kilograms instead of 200 kilograms. Knowing what we know about downside number 2, this upside basically helps not sink in those deep conditions. In my opinion, the best upside here for the Ankatra is its turning radius. I'm not going to speak much on it other than just say how incredible it is to farm or even maneuver in such a sharp manner. Due to its turning radius, drivers can complete fields in a timely manner due to not missing the rows intended, even at corners. Being placed in the off-road class category, not many of them, as you know, have advanced special gearboxes. But this one has custom gearboxes that also have a 0% all-wheel drive penalty, giving the Ankatra maximum performance while also extending its range, offsetting its small fuel tank. Stability is probably my favorite upside to talk about because I think it's one of the best upsides that you can have in a truck personally. So in general, I just love a truck with stability. The 1160s is pretty good in all honesty. The crane attachment may alter its vertical center of gravity a little bit, but overall I think it's well planted, especially with those double tires, and I do think you should be using the double tires because there's so many advantages to using those. So please use those. They're going to be very advantageous for you, but keep in mind here that there's actually more weight in its cab than in its frame. To close out the upsides list here for the Ankatra, before we move on to the Futom, I must lastly say, and just briefly speaking, I do think it's still worthy of being an upside because you can essentially attach one hitch type, which is the coupler, for farming and still hook up regular trailers without switching your actual hitch type. I think this is great, and this also applies to both tractors, the Ankatra 1160 and the Futom 7290 Romeo Alpha. So anyways, let's move on here to the Futom 7290 Romeo Alpha. Starting out the downsides list here, weighing as nearly as much as the twin steer, but only 180,000 torque for its top engine makes pulling weight slightly more difficult than others. Before moving on to our next downside here, I must mention this truck suffers from power simply not being fed to all wheels, even in high gear. I found that the best potential of this truck is low gears with differential locking engaged. Without diff lock engaged, players might feel this truck just doesn't want to turn tires. Despite having massive tires, the Futom's ground clearance isn't really that great, but its saving grace is its large tires. See, in those deep rutted trails or those rocky areas, the 7290 can sometimes get itself caught up, and this has been observed in my testing. A slight continuation here of downside number 2, the Futom has weight options in its add-on list. Well, the problem with these front weights is that they extend the poor collision model in its front end. These weights can be good in certain conditions, but overall traversing trails in SnowRunner with this weight set can cause hangups. Just like the Corvette's K7M and other wide trucks in this game, this tractor is extremely wide. This becomes an issue because I think there has been a shift in terrain layout as of Year 4 Pass. A lot of trails in the Year 4 Pass have been smaller and have considerable amounts of rocks and also drop-offs to contend with. Being that this truck has an overall wide size, I think this will be a struggle in most of these places. As explained on downside number 4, small trails, tight passes, rocky cliffs, drop-offs, this makes it difficult to move logs with this truck, and that's if you try to pull them up the steep Season 14 inclines in those said conditions. In truth, it might be on the downsides list, but I do like that it excels at one thing the most, with the potential to do something else, but just not as good. Speaking of the good, let's take a look at what makes this tractor appealing. Our traditional upside number 1 stays intact here, with the exception of power, which I believe it somewhat lacks. As we continue this list, these upsides form a coalition to make an impressive, deep condition tractor. There's a lot going on here at upside number 2, but let's just start with the facts. It's rather heavy, its tires are 1200 kilograms and not 6, they are super wide, and they also are the largest the game has to offer. This all combines to aid in grip, buoyancy, performance, pulling potential, which has been explained on prior videos, and stability. I must also mention that the majority of its weight is set in its frame. I don't think I really need to explain much more here. I believe y'all get the point. It's super fascinating to see such a large vehicle have sharp steering like this. If we compare it to the likes of the K7M, it absolutely dominates it in turning radius. Drivers can essentially stay in the farming zone without leaving due to the all-wheel steering mechanism of the Futom, so it does not have an articulated steering like the K7M, because we all know the K7M steering radius is super wide. So once again, I think this one is probably its best upside, just like I said about the Ankatra as well. Simply put here, while its engine power is rather weak, it's still pretty efficient, but its tank size is still rather large, allowing the Futom, with its ability and its economy, to clear, plant, and harvest fields in a timely, efficient manner. At our final upside here, I think we've seen this one coming. Without saying too much, I will say, however, that I do think, in my opinion, this truck is far better than the K7M and K700 at farming. It essentially boils down to our number 3 upside. The ability to stay on the effective field and or make any turn the way this tractor can makes driving it a pleasure, and it's not articulated, which has its own batch of issues. So in conclusion, Season 14 is indeed much better when it comes to farming, and I partially believe it's due to these two vehicles as well as farming not being over the top as it was in Season 8. The Ankatra here is small, it's stable, and it's super maneuverable, and I think I would use it over the K700 in most conditions. I don't think it's the best vehicle when it comes to logging, due to better options amongst its class and outside of them as well, but I still feel it can do that, so I think you're okay with using this tractor to do logging as well. The true highlight in my opinion here for this vehicle is most definitely its turning radius. It might not be the best vehicle in super heavy conditions, but it manages to off-road pretty well, and it also has exceptional stability. The crane might add some top heaviness to the equation, but I think overall drivers will be pretty satisfied. The Futom, on the other hand, is one that outright replaces any Kiravettes when we speak about farming. The all-wheel steer is absolutely eye-opening. These are my opinions, but the objective fact is that this truck's turning radius, in comparison, makes it much more efficient in that arena. It might not be the truck that you can take into small places and apply to multiple facets of the game, but it has made me enjoy farming much more than Season 8. So in closing, these two focused tractors can be applied to other things in the game with considerations we mentioned, but I tell you honestly, they are a pleasure to drive on a farming plot. Try these tractors out and let me know what you think. I really hope this review gave you a fresh, new perspective of the Ankatra 1160 and Futom 7290RA. Please smash that like button. Definitely share this video with someone who is currently struggling with the game, and subscribe to the channel and hit that bell so you don't miss any future content. Hope you all have a wonderful day, and as always, God bless and stay upright.